Located in the northeastern Pacific Ocean, the Kingdom of Tonga is a small island nation made up of 169 islands and home to a population of 104,000. Its capital, Nuku'alofa, serves as the backdrop for this astonishing story of survival that began in 1965. The protagonists of this story, Mano, Sione, Stephen, Kolo, David, and Luke, were students at a strict Catholic boarding school in Nuku'alofa. Aged between 16 and 18, these young boys shared a common frustration with the school's rigid rules. Seeking freedom and adventure, they concocted a daring plan to sail to the Fiji Islands, about 800 kilometers away, or even further to New Zealand. However, there was one major obstacle: they didn't own a boat. Determined to pursue their plan, the boys decided to steal a local fishing boat. With little preparation, they hastily gathered their supplies, which included a small gas stove, 2 bags of bananas, and a few coconuts. A map didn't even cross their minds. On June 18, 1965, they loaded their stolen boat and set sail for Fiji. At first, everything seemed fine. However, after nightfall, disaster struck. A sudden storm swept their boat off course. The strong winds tore the sail, broke the rudder, and caused some of their supplies to fall overboard. Stranded in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, the boys were left to the mercy of the waves. After sailing approximately 8 kilometers north, they anchored for the night and made the critical mistake of falling asleep. At this point, their seemingly smooth journey took a dark turn. In the middle of the night, a powerful storm unexpectedly struck, pushing the boat southwest. The fierce winds broke the rudder and tore the sail, while some oars and a portion of their food supplies were swept into the sea. The only thing they could see around them were the churning, foamy waves. They were now stranded in the vast expanse of the ocean, utterly helpless. That evening, when the boys didn't return home, their families and the authorities began searching for them. After learning that a fishing boat had gone missing, they quickly realized that the boys had likely taken it to escape. However, the storm delayed the start of the search efforts by 2 days. Additionally, since no one knew about their exact plan, the search teams had no idea where to look for them. Tonga's economy, based on agriculture, fishing, and tourism, has always faced challenges due to the nation's remoteness and complex transportation structure. This made trading with other countries difficult and kept Tonga a relatively poor nation. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that the 6 boys dreamed of a better life and decided to head for Fiji, one of the wealthiest countries in the Pacific. After a week of searching, the boys were nowhere to be found on any islands in Tonga or Fiji. Almost everyone was convinced they had drowned. However, that was far from the truth. Surprisingly, the boys were still alive, drifting aimlessly in the ocean while keeping their eyes on the horizon, hoping to spot land. By the end of the 4th day, their remaining food supplies were completely gone, yet they continued moving forward, hungry and thirsty, with no idea where they were. Finally, on the 8th day, they spotted a small island in the distance. Determined not to miss their chance, they dismantled anything from the boat that could be used as makeshift paddles and rowed towards the island with all their strength. Unfortunately, just as they were about to reach the shore, their boat crashed into the rocky coastline, sustaining irreparable damage. With no idea where they had landed, the boys climbed the rocks and at last set foot on solid ground. This was Ata Island, a desolate land with an area of only 1,005 square kilometers, surrounded by steep cliffs. There was no one to help because the last inhabitants had been forced to leave nearly a century earlier. In 1863, around 350 people lived on the island and frequently traded with passing ships. However, an Australian named Thomas McGrath, who had shifted from whaling to the slave trade, arrived with a sinister plan. Under the pretense of friendship, he invited the islanders aboard his ship, offering food and drinks. 44 people were aboard. Thomas locked them in the cargo hold and sailed away, selling them as slaves in Peru. Despite the Tonga king's efforts to bring his people back, he was unsuccessful, and the remaining islanders abandoned Ata to avoid the same fate. From that time on, no one lived on the island until these 6 lost boys arrived. The boys who set foot on the island had no idea they had drifted 160 kilometers south of where they had started. Their goal was to reach the Fiji Islands, northwest of their starting point, and they still believed they were heading in that direction. However, this misconception would play a cruel trick on them, for now they had to find a way to survive on this desolate land. At first, they were too weak to make fire and survived by eating shellfish, papaya, and coconuts. but these were scarce, so their primary food source became seabirds and their eggs. To quench their thirst, they even drank the blood of the birds, as there was no freshwater source on the island. After regaining some strength a few days later, they climbed to the top of the island and discovered remnants of the island's former inhabitants in an old volcanic crater. Among the findings were wild taro, banana trees, seeds, primitive knives, and pottery. The biggest surprise, however, was the presence of wild chickens. Left behind by the islanders a century ago, these chickens had managed to survive and reproduce. The boys realized that people had once lived here, and the remnants of their lives were now offering the boys a chance to survive. Working in pairs, the boys divided responsibilities among themselves, creating an organized schedule for tasks like gardening, cooking, and keeping watch. Their first step was to build a shelter with a roof made of palm leaves. Then they planted a small vegetable garden with edible roots they found and built coops to keep the chickens they had discovered. To solve the water problem, they carved large containers out of tree trunks to collect rainwater. Soon, the clothes they had arrived in became unusable, forcing them to remain naked. Though it was embarrassing at first, they eventually got used to it. Learning to make fire took nearly 3 months, and when they succeeded, they were able to eat cooked food for the first time. The fire was also kept burning day and night as a signal in case a rescue team approached. Over time, they established a daily routine and, in their spare time, built a makeshift gym and even a badminton court. Their creativity, determination, and teamwork were remarkable, as they knew working together was their only hope of survival. When disagreements occurred, they would retreat to opposite ends of the island to calm down and then return to discuss and find a solution. Most of the time, they got along well, often singing songs at night accompanied by a guitar they made from wood, nails, and wires salvaged from the boat. Every day began and ended with songs and prayers. One day, one of the boys fell while trying to catch a bird near a cliff and broke his leg. The others immediately climbed down, helped him back up, and splinted his leg with wood wrapped in leaves. While he recovered, his friends shared his responsibilities, and eventually his leg healed, leaving only a small scar as a reminder. 6 months passed, and still, no one had come to the island or even passed nearby. They nearly gave up hope of returning home. They tried to escape just once. They built a raft out of logs tied together with vines and set off from the southern part of the island. However, after a few hundred meters, the raft broke apart in the waves, forcing them to return to shore. This failure turned out to be a stroke of luck because, believing they were further north, they had chosen to head south. If their plan had succeeded, they would have found themselves in the open ocean with nothing but Antarctica in the far distance. After 15 months, on September 11, 1966, an unbelievable event occurred. Peter Warner, an Australian fishing boat captain, was searching for fishing grounds near an island he knew had been abandoned a century earlier. He noticed scorched patches on the rocks and suddenly heard a scream. Initially, he thought it was seabirds, but when he looked through his binoculars, he saw a group of naked people. As he carefully approached, he noticed one of them swimming toward his boat, followed by 5 others jumping off the cliffs and into the water. At that time, it was common to abandon criminals on deserted islands, so Peter hesitated to let them aboard. However, curiosity and pity won out, and he eventually helped them onto his boat. One of the boys spoke English, explaining that they had escaped from school, suffered a boat accident, and had been stranded for over a year. Skeptical at first, Peter radioed the Coast Guard in Nuku'alofa, providing the boys' names. 20 minutes later, an emotional voice confirmed that the boys had been presumed dead and even funeral ceremonies had been held for them. Peter brought the boys home, where they were greeted with joy and celebration by their families. However, the miracle was overshadowed when the owner of the stolen boat filed charges, and the boys were arrested. Determined to help, Peter visited the boat's owner and paid him £150, negotiating the boys' release under the condition of cooperation for a film adaptation. The story of 6 boys stranded on an island quickly became legendary. Doctors who examined them marveled at their perfect health, particularly the boy who had broken his leg, as the bone had healed flawlessly. Peter was hailed as a national hero and soon commissioned a new boat, naming it Atta in honor of the island. The boys returned to Atta Island with Peter to appear in a documentary, and later he gave them the opportunity to see the world beyond Tonga by hiring them as his crew.